too young for goodbye. I still remember the day my cousin Aisha was born. I was just a toddler, but I've seen all the photos, her tiny hands curled around my finger, her soft black hair standing up in tufts, her eyes wide and curious even as a baby. Growing up, we were always together. Our families lived in the same city, and every summer, we'd spend weeks at each other's houses, playing hide and seek, dressing up in our mother's old saris, and giggling late into the night. Aisha was always the braver one, the one who'd climb the highest tree, sneak the last piece of chocolate, or dare to splash water on our strict grandmother. She had a round face, big brown eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a smile that could melt anyone's anger. Her hair was thick and always a little messy, no matter how much her mother tried to tame it with oil and braids. As we grew older, things started to change. I was always the good student, the one who brought home certificates and trophies. Aisha, on the other hand, struggled with her studies. She'd get bored in class, doodle in her notebooks, and daydream out the window. Her parents, especially her father, my uncle, never let her forget it. He was a tall, heavy man with a booming voice and sharp eyes that missed nothing. My aunt was quieter, but always seemed worried, her hands busy with prayer beads or kitchen work. Their house was big and filled with expensive things, crystal vases, silk curtains, gold-framed photos, but it never felt warm. There was always a sense of rules, of things you couldn't say or do, of eyes watching from every corner. Aisha's elder brother, Imran, was almost 10 years older than her. He had a thick beard, always wore crisp white shirts, and spoke with the kind of confidence that made people listen, even when he said the most ridiculous things. He believed girls should be married off young, before they could get spoiled by the world. He'd say it at every family gathering, and the older women would nod, even as some of the younger ones rolled their eyes behind his back. My own mother, who grew up in the same family, was nothing like them. She was a doctor, always busy, always learning, and she'd tell me stories of how she fought to study, to work, to travel. She was my hero, and I never understood how she came from such a regressive family. Last year, when I turned 19, I started college in the city. I was busy with classes, friends, and dreams of my own future. Aisha was just a year and a half younger, but our lives were already so different. She called me sometimes, her voice soft and hesitant. She'd ask about my classes, my friends, what it was like to go out for coffee or stay up late studying. She never spoke much about her own life, but I could sense her loneliness, the way she longed for something more. Then, out of nowhere, my mother told me Aisha was getting engaged. She was just 17 at the time. The news hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe it. I begged my mother to talk to her brother, to stop them, but she just sighed and said, "You know how they are. They won't listen to anyone." I didn't even want to go to the engagement, but my mother insisted. "Aisha will want you there," she said. The engagement was held in their huge, marble-floored living room, full of flowers and gold decorations. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes, but the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Aisha wore a bright red lehenga, her hair pulled back, her lips painted a deep shade of pink. She looked beautiful, but her smile seemed too wide, too practiced. The groom, Armin, was a tall, fair-skinned boy of 21. He wore a designer sherwani and expensive shoes, and he barely looked at Aisha. He spent most of the evening talking to his friends, laughing loudly, showing off his new watch. His family was even richer than Aisha's, and they walked around like royalty, barely acknowledging the rest of us. I watched Aisha closely, trying to read her face. She laughed when people spoke to her, nodded politely, and touched her parents' feet when they asked. But when she thought no one was looking, I saw her eyes dart around the room, her fingers twisting the edge of her dupatta. I wanted to run to her, to grab her hand and pull her away, but I knew I couldn't. When I hugged her before leaving, she held on for a moment longer than usual. "Will you call me tonight?" she whispered. I nodded, fighting back tears. After the engagement, I tried to talk to my mother again. "Why are they doing this? She's just a child," I cried. My mother looked tired. "This is how things are in their family. They think it's safer for girls to get married young. They think it's tradition." I wanted to scream. My mother, who had fought so hard for her own freedom, seemed powerless against her brother's will. The wedding was planned for a few months later, just after Aisha's 18th birthday. I refused to go. I told my mother I couldn't watch my cousin's life being decided for her. She didn't argue. "I understand," she said quietly. I saw the sadness in her eyes, the same sadness I felt in my heart. I saw photos of the wedding on social media. Aisha in a heavy gold sari, her eyes lined with kohl, her smile even wider than before. Armin standing beside her, looking proud and a little smug. The hall was decorated like a palace, with chandeliers and fountains and hundreds of guests. Everyone looked happy, but all I could see was a girl who should have been studying for exams, not posing for wedding pictures. After the wedding, I called Aisha. She sounded cheerful, almost excited. She told me about her new house, her in-laws, the gifts she'd received. She said Armin was nice, that his family was kind, and that she was lucky. But I could hear something in her voice, a kind of emptiness, a pause before every answer. I asked her if she was really happy. She laughed and said, "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. A few weeks later, I visited her new house. It was even bigger than her parents', with marble floors, huge windows, and servants everywhere. Aisha wore expensive clothes, gold bangles jingling on her wrists, her hair always perfectly styled. She showed me around, pointing out the new things she'd received: jewelry, clothes, gadgets. But when we were alone in her room, her smile faded. She sat on the bed, pulling her knees to her chest. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," she whispered. "Everyone says I'm lucky. Everyone says I should be happy. But sometimes I just feel empty." I hugged her, and she started to cry. She told me she missed her old life, her friends, her freedom. She said Armin was polite, but distant. He spent most of his time with his friends or on his phone. His family was strict. She wasn't allowed to go out alone, and every move she made was watched. She tried to study, but there was always something else to do: guests to greet, chores to finish, traditions to follow. "They say they're letting me study," she said, "but it's just for show. They don't really care." I listened, feeling helpless. I wanted to tell her to run away, to fight for her dreams, but I knew how impossible that was. In our family, in our society, girls like Aisha are expected to obey, to smile, to accept their fate. I thought of my mother, her quiet strength, her battles fought and won. I wondered how she had survived, how she had broken free. Aisha's brother, Imran, visited while I was there. He sat in the living room, drinking tea and talking loudly about how girls these days were out of control. He said Aisha was lucky to have such a good husband, such a rich family. He looked at me and said, "You should think about your own wedding. Don't wait too long. Girls lose their value after a certain age." I wanted to throw my tea in his face, but I just smiled politely and left the room. That night, I lay awake, thinking about Aisha, about all the girls in my family who had been married off young, their dreams packed away with their wedding clothes. I thought about my mother, the exception, the one who had dared to want more. I wondered if I would have the courage to fight for my own future, to break the cycle. A few months passed. I called Aisha often, but our conversations grew shorter. She was always busy, always surrounded by people. I could hear the strain in her voice, the way she tried to sound happy. Her social media was full of photos, smiling with her husband, posing with her in-laws, dressed up for every occasion. But I knew the truth. I could see it in her eyes, in the way her messages became less frequent, less personal. One day, I got a message from her. "I miss you," she wrote. "I miss who I used to be." I called her immediately, but she didn't answer. I left her a long voice message, telling her she was not alone, that I loved her, that she could always talk to me. I didn't know if she'd ever listen to it. I talked to my mother about Aisha. She listened quietly, her eyes sad. "I wish things were different," she said. "But change is slow. You have to be brave, Mira. You have to fight for what you want." I promised her I would. Now, every time I see a wedding photo, every time I hear about another cousin getting engaged, I feel a mix of anger and sadness. I think of Aisha, of all the girls who never got the chance to choose their own path. I think of my mother, her strength and courage. And I think of myself, standing at the edge of adulthood, determined not to let my dreams be taken away. Aisha's story is not just hers. It's the story of so many girls, in so many families, trapped by tradition, by fear, by the expectations of others. But it's also a story of hope. Because every time someone dares to ask why, every time someone says no more, the world changes, even if just a little. I still call Aisha whenever I can. Sometimes she sounds happy, sometimes sad. But I always remind her that she is strong, that she is loved, and that her story is not over. And I remind myself, too, that I have the power to write my own.